Hi everyone. Back to the revolver with the Beatles and with my trusty Beatles drink to accompany me. Same pattern, same habit. Cold first listen, no preparation beforehand, no information beforehand. Just my first exposure without anything else going on, except for maybe a sip of tea. And then we'll go back through and explore some more, and I will read a bit between the two listens. So, well, let's give it a try. To lead a better life. Isn't that one beautiful? It has a sort of wistful melancholy to it, I think, and it's at the same time, it's light. There's a sort of yearning quality, and at the same time, it feels very warm and happy. It's an interesting mix of emotional experiences that comes through. Okay, well, it's time for me to read a bit of background. No. Vlad is shaking his head. I need to guess a bit. Okay, what shall I try to figure out this time just by guessing? The title maybe? Could be... No, here, there, and everywhere, perhaps. All right, did I get it? Okay. Here, there, and everywhere. Okay, got that much. Who's singing it? It gets challenging to me because I can hear that there's more studio editing happening. And the sound in my ears for the voices is still the early Beatles, so it's hard for me to decide. But I'm going to say again, this is not a John Lennon song piece. I'm pretty convinced of that. I'm going to guess that this time it is Paul McCartney.
Yes.
Because, okay, Vlad says yes. My reason for that is because McCartney's voice to me is, well, if I were to, let's start by describing Lennon's voice. Lennon's voice to me is a bit nasally and has an edge to it. And most of the times that he's singing, although there have been a few exceptions, most of the times he's singing, I feel like his way of emotional communication, expression with his voice is very understated, very, very reserved. He doesn't really get intensely pouring out the emotions sort of style. Now, McCartney's voice, to my mind, is kind of like Lennon's, but without the edge and without the brassiness, without the cutting nasal quality. It's an almost smoothly sanded piece of wood, raw wood. There's this raw wood quality to it, and it's not silky smooth, but it's not rough either. And, well, some of you know that my father was a piano technician, restored pianos. In other words, he was good working with wood, and he's even built some of my harps. So I'm familiar with the scent of wood in the wood shop. And somehow McCartney's voice makes me feel like that raw wood scent, that feel that you get when you step into a wood shop and the air is heavy with dust. A pleasant kind of dust. It's not an unpleasant dust, but there's this sort of, okay, this is a very particular sound, and I know I'm relating it to tactile and scent, but still I'm trying to describe how I would identify, and those are the qualities that make me think of McCartney's voice, or that McCartney's voice makes me think of, and this piece has kind of that quality, and that's why I chose McCartney. Well, Vlad says I got it right this time, so that pleases me. Okay, let's read. Oh, we're at number 60 in this 150 series. Hitting another milestone. The genre is soft rock, pop. Oh, you know what? The other thing that I was thinking of as I was listening is, have any of you ever listened to Edward MacDowell's "To a Wild Rose"? It's an early 20th century ballad type classical tradition, but this piece kind of gave me that same sort of feeling of mixed emotions, as well as the style. Okay, I could pick out a few drums, yes, nice texture added to it, nice bit of beat, but I was thinking I'd almost put this in the early 20th century, first half of the 20th century classical song tradition rather than rock or something like that. So it's interesting to see it classed as soft rock, which is probably appropriate, but very nice. Paul expressed how strongly he felt about Here, There, and Everywhere in many interviews throughout the years. People say, "Which is your favorite tune?" And I'm often tempted to say Yesterday because it arrived so magically, but I like this one, he once stated about this revolver ballad. In fact, if pushed, I would say that Here, There, and Everywhere is my own favorite of all my songs. So now, when I sing it, I look back at it and think, the boy's not bad. Interestingly, after Michael Jackson bought the rights to the Lennon-McCartney catalog in August of 1985, Paul expressed the wish during an interview that he could at least own a couple that he was particularly fond of. Here, There, and Everywhere was one of those. I wrote that by John's pool one day, Paul remembered in 1984. Oh yeah, okay. It could be something other than a woodshop song. It could be a poolside song. That works too. In his book, Many Years From Now, Paul explains how he showed up at Lennon's Kenwood home to write songs one day in June of 1966. And while John was still in bed, oh yes, I figured out that John is always in bed, at least till afternoon, asked someone there for a cup of tea and went with his guitar to sit alongside John's swimming pool. I sat out by the pool on one of the sun chairs with my guitar, Paul relates, and started strumming an E, soon had a few chords, and I think by the time he'd woken up I had pretty much written the song, so we took it indoors and finished it up. John might have helped with a few last words, but it's very me. It's one of my favorite songs that I've written. So I would credit me pretty much 80 to 20 on that one. John was non-committal on his actual input on the writing of the song, although very complimentary, saying in 1980, Here, There, and Everywhere was Paul's song completely, I believe, and one of my favorite songs of the Beatles. In 2000, Mojo ranked it 4th in the magazine's list of the greatest songs of all time. Well, that's a nice bit of background, and having the poolside context is really quite nice, and probably as I go back and listen through again, I'll have that, and I can imagine the environment, the feel of it, and yeah, I think a poolside song is a good way of describing all that goes with it. So let's go back and listen. To lead a better life. Okay, so now I have this idea of poolside fresh in my mind, and I guess it suits. I think it really does suit. This introduction, I could say it has this really watery feeling of shifting moods. It's so, well, even the arpeggiated line coming up to it, right? Isn't it kind of liquidy? And maybe it sounds incredibly simple. It's just a couple arpeggios, but when we look at the harmonies underneath, and I feel like this is a song that really needs some attention on the harmonic scheme, because it has some lovely shifts throughout the piece. So let's start giving our attention right at the beginning here. So we start with the G major. But we don't stay on G major. We could. But that's kind of ordinary. What did he do? He went from G major to a B minor, which is the minor 3. And that suddenly gives it that, what I was describing at first is this sort of melancholy, wistful feeling, almost bittersweet quality. We pick it up right away in this intro. To go to the minor so quickly. And then, doesn't leave it there. We shift immediately. The same chord, but now major and flat. So what happens is we just drop a semitone. And then we have... Well, doesn't that open it up? But it doesn't really brighten it. Why? Because... Let's go to the piano for this. So, we have a B minor, which is B, D, F sharp. Okay. Now, that's all fine. But then if we want to turn it to major, normally what we would do is we would move the middle note up a semitone. And that gives it a brightening quality, a feeling of, oh, the sun just came out. But instead what happens is that middle note becomes our anchor point. We end up going from B minor to B flat major, which means the two outer notes, if I'm shaping it here, lower note, middle note, upper note. And this is my minor configuration. This finger is not going to move. These two outer notes will shift down a semitone. So we get this wonderful downwards drop, and it opens, it becomes major, but it doesn't lift because nothing is moving upwards. Instead, it's dropping lower. So there's this feeling of kind of falling out the bottom a bit, perhaps. It's like, we just realized perhaps that we can't touch the bottom of the pool. It's deeper than we realized there. There's this quality of yes, it's major, but it's not this sort of brightening, freshening quality. It's more of a filling out expansion without the brightness quality of it. And all the way through this piece, I was hearing these wonderful, lovely transitions and this feeling of kind of, I wouldn't say unsteady, but certainly not established. There's this constant shift harmonically and these wonderful transitions to other places that are maybe not, I wouldn't say that they're unusual, but that's why I like this idea of water as being a kind of a starting point for how we look at this, because it has that feeling of instability, of liquidity, fluidity throughout, harmonically, which is a lot of fun to explore. To lead a better life. And also on this here, we kind of just after we drop down into this major and it suddenly becomes full and deep beneath the chord, then we also drop down, love to be here. And in that moment, things kind of shift again to become minor. Now we're on the A minor. Well, let me mark the score just so we can follow along. So we start with G. This is our G major. And of course it goes to the minor 3, and that's all good. And this is where the bottom kind of surprises us, drops out, fills out, and we find a lot of depth there in the sound. And then here's where we're walking down, love to be here. And this is where we arrive on a kind of A minor chord moment. But then it shifts again to D major. Nothing is quite settled. Nothing is really establishing itself strongly for a long period of time. There's this constant shift and movement and feeling of being in transition. could call it a feeling of unease, perhaps. And that goes along with the lyrics and what's being expressed in the lyrics, because to need a better life, I need my love to be here. In other words, okay, I'm here, it's good, but to really have the kind of life I want, to feel settled, to feel like I can be the best me that is possible, somehow this person is missing in my life. They're not here with me, and it just doesn't feel quite right. It doesn't. There's just this unease, this sense of, as I said, yearning, melancholy, all of this, as if I can't settle. And this introduction does a wonderful job of setting up this element for the entire piece of music. And then, well, let's keep going through, because as we go on, we'll hear some more lovely spots. But I feel like this introduction is really worth paying attention to, because it sets the tone for the whole piece. I also like the free-form quality of it. To lead a better life, I need my love to be here. You know, come to think of it, just as I'm singing through this, fingering through this, listen, do you want to know a secret? It kind of has the same quality, doesn't it? That sort of, what's coming next? And listen, do you want to know a secret? To lead a better life, I need my love to be here. Okay, now, okay. Hold on. Was Do You Want to Know a Secret? Was that a McCartney song too?
John Lennon's song.
Too bad. Well, I was hoping that I was starting to notice some McCartney fingerprints, but it seems like not yet. Okay, that is not a McCartney fingerprint. That's a Beatles fingerprint. To lead a better life, I need my love to be here. And then, well, let's start back at the beginning to get the full impact of when we arrive at the real verse. To lead a better life. Changing my life with a wave of her hand. Well, that kind of puts a different perspective on this whole shifting, transitioning, transforming quality in the music. It's almost like I don't really quite have an anchor anymore, because she's done so much to my life, and it tumbles me around, and I get all mixed up inside, and all she does is wave her hand, and the whole world is different, and we could go a lot of different directions with this changeability concept. Okay. This is kind of a nice thing to notice here, and that is what's happening in the vocal background, backing to the melody. We have, again, we're still in G major, and the voices are simply singing stepwise, walking up chords. 1, 2, 3, 4. G major, A minor, B minor, C major. And then we go back down. Kind of straightforward and simple, but how often do we hear these sorts of stepwise chords just moving up and then repeating like that? Usually we'll hear some other kind of progression, you know? We could maybe go something like that, a little more ordinary, but I like this. A lot of, again, major and minor coloring, because we have the major, then we have 2 minors back to back, and then we have a major, not the 5, it's the 4. So with all of this motion, we don't have the heavy-handedness, the assertiveness of the 5, the dominant, really pushing us around. So it brings us back to this whole idea of shifting, subtle motion, transition, fluid, natural, no hard edges. I also like this moment here where we rise up to this A at the peak, which is a non-harmony note, making each day, making each day. That A, somehow, it adds this melancholy element. Because, okay, we can have a B minor, it's nice enough. But to have a B minor with a non-harmony A thrown in, which doesn't belong to the chord following it either, it's kind of lingering from the chord that came before, because we had before this A minor. We were simply walking up from A minor to the B. And so when the voice sings this line where we're on the B, actually, without the chord underneath, it could be a G still. And then it could be another A minor. And we could either go back to G or we could go to E. So my point is, special little links from one chord to the next. Allusions, connections, shadows, hints, little strands which could go here, could go there. And it just so happens that instead of having G to A minor again, we have B minor to C. But because the outline of the melody could be G to A minor, it feels like it's all connected in this very smooth, fluid way. And I like that. And somehow, when we're on that peak A, I mean, when I listen to him sing it, it feels like that each day reaching up, it's so, something about it is painful to me. In a sweet way, making each day of the year lonely. There's almost this feeling of feeling abandoned in it. Not actually abandoned, but this feeling of, I just don't belong here without the other person. And it comes through the music so strongly to my ears. And I like the way after we've had all this motion in the melody, making each day of the year, changing my life with a wave of her hand. Nobody can. Suddenly we're stuck on this B as the harmonies underneath are changing. And it's one of those kind of, we could call it sleights of hand, where we get this feeling of motion and we hear the melody moving, and then when it stays, suddenly sticks on a note. But the harmonies, the backing vocals and everything behind it keep moving, keep changing. It doesn't lose its sense of motion because the backing vocals are keeping it going. You hear when they sing on wave of her hand, and the woo behind it is shifting color. It's like shadows coming and going. Maybe the sun has gone behind a cloud for a minute and then it comes out, or the breeze picks up just enough to feel a little chill, and then the sun comes out stronger on your cheek and it's warm enough again. It's that sort of feeling of constant change and motion. But at the same time, because we've stuck on this note with the melody, it gives us a feeling, it gives us the chance to kind of tug on the heartstrings a bit, pull a bit. Wave of her hand, nobody can. And it's like somebody's just grabbing you by the hand and pulling a little bit, because that note just wants to pull us along. And that's one thing I noticed about this piece, is the nice transition between, okay, sometimes the melody is really going all over the place. Other times it sticks in one spot, and it's the harmonies that keep the motion going around. And that melody note just pulls at us. If I could give a really banal illustration, I would say it's kind of like a kid with chewing gum in their teeth and they're stretching it out, feeling the tension. So that's kind of what's happening here. And I have to appreciate the backing instrumentals, the gentle approach to the drums that's happening. The bass, which it's present, but it's not really, it's really, you have to pay attention to notice it. You have to look for it. And when you look for it, you suddenly realize, oh, it's right there in front of my face. But it's so supportive of all that's happening in the voices with this rich tapestry and prismatic effect of motion, color shifting that's happening. Both of us thinking how good it can be. Isn't that a lovely moment where we've just been so accustomed to hearing these voices swirling around us and filling the space, and then suddenly, I want her everywhere. And everything drops out. It almost feels like it's a cappella. And again, it's one of those funny moments where when we stop and look, oh no, there's still some instruments playing along. But it was just the voices that dropped out. And somehow it was such a contrast, such a clearing of the air, that it almost feels like we've gone a cappella, although we haven't. But she doesn't know he's there. I love this spot. Okay, so the air cleared. It became just a solo voice. I want her everywhere. And if she's beside me, I know I need never. And then something comes weaving in. It's a guitar. Semitones, half steps, chromaticism, da 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 da. It's so full of yearning and longing. I love the fact that it doesn't come after the melodic phrase is finished. It enters before and creates this wonderful layering effect. And then as it continues, the voice comes in with another breath. So we get this staggered effect. And it just, the simplicity of it, the beauty of it, and the feeling of, it's like, as you're sitting there feeling completely alone and you feel the space empty around you, and I want her everywhere. And if she's beside me, I know I need never care. And in that moment, maybe she just slips in and sits down beside you before you've even finished the thought. But love to her is to need her everywhere. Oh, but to love her is to need her. I've got to read my text properly. But to love her is to need her everywhere. And as she sits down beside you, kind of snuck up on you, and you suddenly realize. And then we have this wonderful duo between the guitar and the voice, as if it's two personalities now together. And then here come the voices again. It's such a beautiful layering of adding in parts. And if she's beside me, I know. It's so beautiful. It's like, I don't want to stop it because I don't want to interrupt it, but let's stop it because, things to notice. Another thing I like about the structure of this piece is how the rhythms of it. Well, we're gliding along. Sometimes we're moving, sometimes we're staying, sometimes we're taking leaps up and down the scale, arpeggiated with our voice. I'm talking about the melody here now. And all of this, I like how the rhythmic effect of it is also quite varied. Going back to the beginning, here, big pause. And then a long line, making each day of the year, changing my life with a wave of her hand. And if she's beside me, I know I need never care, but to love her is to need her everywhere. And then it shortens a bit, knowing that love is to share. Big pause. Little bit longer, each one believing that love never dies. Big pause. Short bit, watching her eyes. And hoping I'm always there. This constant changing of length. It also, with the varied rhythms, everything, it feels so naturally like speech. I've talked about this before with some of the Beatles songs and other songs on this channel, how it's a real art and craft to make a piece of music musical and at the same time feel incredibly natural by following speech patterns. And this one is interesting because it doesn't have the sort of jazzy swing, which actually imitates a lot of what we do when we're speaking. It's very straight in that regard. But this clumping and lumping of varied lengths of phrases and this really, when you start pulling it apart, if I were to take this whole piece apart and look in detail where we're taking big leaps, where we're taking small steps, where we're sitting in one place, where we pause, I think that it would start to look very much like our everyday speaking, where sometimes we stop in the middle of a sentence to kind of gather our thoughts for a second, and then we continue. Or, you know, we're not speaking in terms of in some sort of practiced prose or poetry. It comes out in spurts and fits and starts. But here it's set so smoothly, so beautifully, that it's incredibly sweet musically, as well as feeling this very natural, conversational flow. I think that's one of the things that makes this piece stand out as well, is that it feels so natural. In spite of the fact that sometimes we go way up to an A, da 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 da, it doesn't feel strained. It doesn't feel contrived. It just is the natural flow and pattern of the way we work. And hoping I'm always there. Lingering. Isn't that so beautiful? It's like, it's the same place where it drops out and it's clear. And then here comes the second personality, the guitar. Da 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 da, and it becomes a duet. And every time it comes together, and then the voices fill in, we feel this warming, this warmth of the room coming around us and coming alive. Now, going back to this speech pattern and this long pauses, places where we linger, places where we move quite rapidly. I'm thinking of other Beatles songs which I have heard with the same pattern. There are a couple of them. For example, Yesterday. Yesterday, all my troubles seem so far away. Or Eleanor Rigby. Da 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 dum ba da dum ba da. However it goes on and on. But there's this statement at the beginning. I'm thinking. How about Michelle? Michelle, ma belle. And then it starts to flow on again. It's kind of doing the same here. Here. Making each day of the year. Okay. I'm going to have to go back and double check who was the primary composer between those songs. let's see, what did I name? Yesterday,
Paul.
Michelle,
Paul.
and Eleanor Rigby. Paul. Ha! And now I have this, here, there, and everywhere.
Paul.
Okay, you know what? I think we've just figured out a Paul fingerprint. I think we have. A statement, and then a sort of flow of words stringing out. A little pause, and some more flow. Kind of the uneven phrases. I think we just spotted something. I'm going to have to pay attention to this in the future and see how much it comes back and how much of it is Paul. But, yeah. Tell me what you think. Well, maybe you can do a little bit of anticipation work, because I don't know when I will get to whatever song next, if there are more songs that have this pattern. But maybe if you know some, you can scan through and see how many of them are Paul creations. That'd be a fun little project if you're interested. And okay, now, we're kind of towards the end here, aren't we? And suddenly we have finger snaps coming in. I've been talking about the harmonic shifting, shape-shifting, color-changing quality of the chords. I've been talking about the wide variety in the melody. And then I started talking about how this staggered activity here. And if she's beside me, I know I need never care. And then the guitar comes in, the kind of the two-personality moment, separate, and then they come together and travel together. Now we come to the ending, and that was the ending portion was a bit of a surprise to me. I don't know if I love these finger snaps. So far, the piece has felt so intimate, so special, so somehow incredibly personal, that when the finger snaps come in, I almost feel like, they changed the mood a bit. It's more casual. Snap, snap. Okay, I'm singing this. It's more of a party type feel. Although, if we take this little section where we've had the guitar and the voice, and we really go with this idea of, okay, we have the voice, the guitar represents her slipping into the room, sitting down beside you, now you're going together, then perhaps the mood change is appropriate. Okay, now the two of us are together, things get a little bit lighter, a little bit more carefree and happy. Suddenly it feels right that we're together, and we can loosen up, snap our fingers a little bit. Maybe that's okay. And that little bit of a drum fill was so gentle, but it came at just the right moment. And then that little flute entering at the last second. Like, hold on. That just came in almost at the end. It hasn't been here. It could have been fine without it. It could have been perfectly fine. But, I guess one of the qualities that I'm trying to express and that I felt in the first listen is this idea that every step of the way, although this has such a placid quality to it, it feels peaceful, placid, easygoing, laid back, at ease, although there is this feeling of unease as well, but the overall pacing of it. Every bit of the way, there's some new element coming in. All the way to the last few bars. And even in these last few bars, well, I don't know, if you were writing an essay in school, you might get a little bit of a correction from your teacher saying, don't put new material in the conclusion. But we don't have to be so strict with music. And while it is good to not pile everything at the end and leave it feeling like, what happened there? I kind of like this little flute tossed in at the last few seconds. Just to conclude it, So we went from this wonderful, open, shape-shifting introduction through these beautiful harmonized chords behind this voice that is traveling all over the place and doing all kinds of things. And then we get to the kind of, I guess we'd call it, it's probably more of a bridge than a refrain where we have the guitar and the voice. And then we get to the finger snaps. And then at the last second, we get to the flute. All of this, we've traveled such a journey in such a short space of time. But it has been incredibly sweet all along. Yes, there's this feeling of bittersweet. But when I get to the end and I get to the last few lines, I feel like everything has turned right with the world. Everything has somehow settled into place. It feels like she is suddenly here, there, and everywhere. And this, well, looking at the lyrics, even the lyrics kind of bring it around to thinking that, kind of suggesting that she's there now. Because knowing that love is to share, each one believing that love never dies, watching her and hoping I'm always there. Well, that's a bit different than feeling like I need my love to be here. Now I'm watching her and hoping I'm always there. I will be there and everywhere. Here, there, and everywhere. And when we hear that, here, there, and everywhere, I mean, I was kind of joking when I guessed that that was the title of the song because it was the last line, but it sums everything up. She needs to be here, there, and everywhere. And I hope I will always be here, there, and everywhere. This feeling of mutual attachment, affection, love, connection, presence. And the flute kind of wraps it all up in a package, ties it with a ribbon, and hands it to us and says, here's a gift for you. So I've discovered another beautiful, special Beatles piece of music, and one that I will enjoy listening to many times in the future. It was fun, and I'm especially excited about this idea of maybe we've picked out a McCartney fingerprint, maybe? And it's going to be fun to keep my eyes and ears open for that, just as I have been able to identify a few Lennon-esque qualities, which, okay, let's not get too locked in. And we have noticed that sometimes it wasn't Lennon who did something like that. But there are musical features that a person tends towards in their creativity, just like a painter tends towards certain color mixes. A sculptor tends towards certain lines and shapes. We all have our preferences and tendencies. And so certain things will show up more in one person's work than in others. And so we can't become too arbitrary about it, but it is nice to notice and be able to identify certain characteristics of a composer's, a creator's work. And well, I'm excited about this. So that was Here, There, and Everywhere from the Beatles. It was a Paul McCartney child, shall we say? And absolutely lovely. I guess he must have been deeply in love at that point with his girlfriend. Was that still Jane Asher at that point? Anyway, a lot of fun. Number 60 in the series. 61 is coming, and I'll see you soon.